Commander Jackson Ray leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the quiet expanse of stars outside the viewport. There was a silence that settled deep out here on the frontier. A million light-years from the bustling hub of human civilization, the quiet seemed almost sacred. Some men might have found it unsettling, but not Jackson. He lived for this silence. Out here everything made sense. The Vanguard drifted, its systems set to passive scans. It was routine, a quiet loop of monitoring, a log entry here, a diagnostics check there. Jackson's crew had grown comfortable with the rhythm of it too. Listening post-duty was not for thrill-seekers, and the crew aboard the Vanguard were as dependable as they came. Lieutenant Carla Chin, the ship's communications officer, sat a few feet away, her eyes scanning console data, lost in the gentle hum of the systems. Chief Engineer Rios was down in the engine room as usual, keeping the core running smoothly. "Commander, we're picking up something strange," Carla's voice broke the quiet. Jackson sat up, a tinge of curiosity flickering through him. He moved over to her console. "What are we looking at?" Carla adjusted the screen. "It's faint, barely readable. But it's coming from the far edge of the sector. I'd almost say it's a transmission, but it doesn't match any known frequency." Jackson frowned. Out here, signals were rare, and the few they picked up usually originated from human settlements. But this was different. He scanned the data and felt an unmistakable prickle of intrigue. "Any known source?" he asked. "No, sir," she replied, shaking her head. "It doesn't match any known patterns. Could be background noise, but—" She paused, a flash of unease in her eyes. "But it's not, is it?" he finished for her. Carla met his gaze. "It feels purposeful. There's something in it. Almost like it's calling." Jackson exhaled, considering the consequences. Protocol dictated they report any unusual signals and wait for further instructions. But the thought of simply leaving this unexplored was unsatisfying. A faint thrill stirred in him, a reminder of why he'd come out here in the first place, to go beyond the mapped edges of humanity's reach. "We're going to investigate," he said, making the call. Carla gave a tense nod, and the crew moved into action, adjusting the course. The Vanguard angled toward the unknown and accelerated into the darkness. Hours passed as they traveled deeper into the sector, away from the last traces of known space. The faint signal strengthened, guiding them like a distant beacon. But as they drew closer, strange things began to happen. The ship's systems flickered intermittently, causing minor malfunctions. Diagnostic scans turned up nothing, but the whispers grew louder in the background static, almost forming coherent words. The crew grew tense. "Commander, there's something wrong with the comms," Carla's voice wavered slightly. "I can't isolate it, but it sounds like voices. I don't think it's interference." Jackson's stomach tightened. "Run a full diagnostic. I want to know if this is some kind of glitch." Just as she began, the signal cut through the static in a sudden surge. It was clearer now, a resonant, alien hum that seemed to pulse with intention. The sound crept into the Vanguard, filling the air with an uneasy energy. A chill settled over the bridge. Rios's voice crackled over the intercom. "Commander, the engine's acting up. Power fluctuations, strange readings. Nothing's making sense down here." "Hold steady," Jackson replied, glancing at Carla. "Whatever this thing is, we're getting close." Ahead, an immense shape loomed out of the darkness, a structure unlike anything Jackson had seen. Massive and ancient, it floated in silence, its dark surface absorbing the weak starlight. The architecture was jagged and unnatural, as if it were carved by a hand that had never known mercy. Spires and fractured lines jutted out, giving it a vaguely organic appearance, like bone twisted into impossible angles. Jackson swallowed. "That's no natural formation." They drifted closer, the Vanguard dwarfed by the structure's immense size. Shadows danced across its surface, flickering in the dim light. The signal now resonated from within the structure, a low, beckoning hum that seemed to seep into the walls of the ship itself. Carla's eyes were wide, fixed on the display. "Whatever this is, it's been out here a long time. The signal's coming from deep inside. There must be technology down there, Commander. Maybe a whole civilization left behind. Or something worse," Jackson muttered, suppressing a shiver. He turned to Carla. "Suit up a team. We're going in." Her eyes widened, but she gave a determined nod. Minutes later they assembled, Jackson, Carla, and 2 other crew members. With a last glance at the Vanguard, they exited into the void, moving carefully toward an entryway. Inside the air was cold, almost biting. The walls were covered in faint, glowing glyphs that pulsed in rhythm with the signal. It felt as if the structure were breathing, alive and watching. Every footstep echoed as if amplified by the vast silence surrounding them. Then came the whispers, clearer now, a faint, haunting murmur that sent shivers down their spines. "What is that?" one crew member asked, voice trembling. Jackson's jaw tightened. "Stay close. Don't stray from the group." They pushed forward, guided by the whispers. Each step felt heavier, as if something unseen was weighing them down, probing their minds. Jackson could feel it, like a presence studying them with an ancient, hungry curiosity. At the end of the hall, a door slid open, revealing a dark chamber within. The whispers intensified, a symphony of voices merging into one. Jackson took a steadying breath and stepped forward, feeling that whatever lay beyond was only the beginning. The interior of the structure was vast, colder than any space Jackson had felt before. Their helmet lights barely pierced the thick darkness, and the walls seemed to swallow sound, amplifying every footfall with an unnatural echo. Strange glyphs lined the corridor walls, pulsing faintly as though alive, casting ghostly shadows that twisted and writhed with every step they took. The team advanced slowly, their breaths audible over the comms. The further in they went, the stronger the signal became, now almost like a heartbeat resonating through the walls. The sense of being watched grew, prickling the hairs on the back of Jackson's neck. Every instinct he had screamed to turn back, but curiosity and duty kept him moving forward. "Commander, this place, it's enormous," Carla whispered, breaking the silence. "Stay focused," Jackson replied. "No wandering off. We stick together." They ventured deeper, the narrow corridor opening into a cavernous hall, its ceiling lost in darkness above. The light from their suits illuminated massive archways and strange alien statues, each more grotesque than the last. The statues depicted tall, skeletal figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, almost as if they'd been sculpted to ward off intruders, or contain something within. They split into pairs to cover more ground, Jackson and Carla on one side of the chamber, the other two crew members on the opposite end. As Jackson scanned the area, Carla's voice trembled over the comm. "Commander, do you feel that? The air, it's almost vibrating." He nodded, though she couldn't see him. "It's the signal. It's everywhere now." A faint whispering filled the chamber, words that seemed just out of reach, as if spoken from the shadows. Jackson's hand tightened on his weapon, though he doubted it would be of much use against whatever was down here. He saw the same tension mirrored in Carla's stance. She looked pale, her eyes darting at every shadow that seemed to move. "Rios, report your status," Jackson said, trying to keep his voice steady. Static crackled, then came the faint, distorted reply, "Commander, we saw something move. Can't make contact with you." "Stay where you are," Jackson ordered, his gut nodding. "We'll regroup in 2 minutes." But as they turned to retrace their steps, a low, guttural sound reverberated through the chamber, a sound that felt alive, echoing off every wall. And then, out of the shadows, something stirred. A tall figure emerged, skeletal and draped in shadows, its hollow eyes faintly glowing. Jackson froze, his every sense screaming at him to run. The creature regarded them silently, its gaze cold and ancient, as if assessing them. Just as he moved to speak, the creature slipped back into the shadows, vanishing as if it had never been there. What was that?" Carla whispered, her voice shaking. Jackson took a steadying breath. "I don't know. But I think it's leading us somewhere." Ahead, a door loomed open, revealing a long, dark corridor. And from within, the whispers grew louder, as if welcoming them into the heart of the abyss. The dark corridor led them into a vast, domed chamber at the heart of the structure. Pale lights flickered around the room, illuminating strange machinery that sprawled from floor to ceiling, intricate webs of metal, cables, and glowing panels with symbols that defied recognition. The whispers grew louder here, overlapping until they became an echoing chant that seemed to seep into their minds. Jackson moved cautiously, keeping his weapon at the ready. Carla and the others followed closely, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. In the center of the chamber stood a massive, dormant machine that pulsed faintly, like a dying heartbeat. It had a vaguely spherical shape, covered in swirling glyphs, some of which glowed as they drew closer, as if sensing their presence. Carla's voice trembled as she whispered, "What is this place?" Jackson shook his head, equally entranced and unsettled. "Some kind of containment chamber, maybe?" Then, with a low hum, the machine flickered to life. The glyphs ignited in a brilliant, blinding light, and the whispers surged, filling their minds with strange, vivid images. Jackson staggered, clutching his helmet as visions flooded his senses. He saw a civilization unlike anything he'd known. Towering beings with elongated forms, their eyes hollow yet brimming with wisdom, once ruled these halls. They possessed technology far beyond human understanding, capable of bending reality itself. But the vision darkened, and Jackson saw what had brought them to ruin, a dark, writhing entity, an ancient force from the depths of the void. It consumed their minds, twisted their thoughts, and turned them against one another. These beings had sacrificed everything to build this prison and contain it, sealing themselves away with it, hoping to keep the darkness at bay. The vision faded, and Jackson found himself on his knees, gasping for breath. The whispers had subsided, leaving a cold silence in their wake. Around him, the others were recovering too, looking as shaken as he felt. Carla's face was pale, her eyes haunted. "They trapped it here," she whispered. "Whatever that thing was. They gave everything to keep it contained." Jackson nodded slowly, piecing it together. "And over time the prison weakened. It's been out here waiting, calling for something, someone, to set it free." A sudden realization struck him. The signal they'd picked up, the strange allure of the whispers. This place wasn't just a prison. It was a lure, reaching out into the darkness, drawing anything curious or desperate enough to investigate. "We need to leave," Jackson said, the urgency in his voice undeniable. "Now." But just as they turned to go, the glyphs on the machine flared, filling the chamber with a blinding light. Out of the shadows, a dark figure began to materialize, a shifting mass of shadows and twisted, distorted faces, its eyes gleaming with ancient, malevolent hunger. It was awake. The crew staggered back as the entity slithered toward them, its whispers rising to a crescendo that clawed at their minds, filling their thoughts with fear and despair. Jackson gritted his teeth, fighting the dread that washed over him, and shouted, "Run! Back to the ship!" With every ounce of strength, they turned and fled, the entity close behind, its haunting whispers echoing down the dark corridors as it pursued them through its ancient prison. Jackson and his team sprinted through the twisting corridors, their footsteps echoing against the ancient walls as the entity's dark whispers clawed at their minds. The creature pursued them like a living shadow, its voice growing louder, layering twisted echoes of their own fears. Each whisper stabbed deeper, making every step feel heavier. Jackson could feel its presence pressing against his thoughts, a suffocating weight that sought to invade, to break them. "We're almost there," he shouted, though his voice sounded weak against the oppressive darkness. The distant outline of the Vanguard's docking bay grew clearer, the faint hum of their ship's lights a welcome beacon amid the encroaching void. They stumbled inside, sealing the hatch behind them. Rios hit the emergency lockdown, and the doors groaned shut, cutting off the corridor with a metallic thud. But the ship was eerily silent, too still. Jackson's heart sank as he realized why. The power was still failing. "Rios, what's going on with the engines?" he demanded, the urgency thick in his voice. Rios was already at a console, frantically rerouting systems. "It's like something's draining the power, Commander. Whatever that thing is, it's trying to get in." Jackson's mind raced. The entity wasn't just chasing them, it was attempting to break into their systems, invading the ship itself. If they didn't find a way to fight back, it would devour them piece by piece. "We don't have weapons strong enough to stop it, but maybe..." His gaze shifted to the reactor controls. An idea formed, desperate but possible. He activated the emergency comm, looking at his crew with steely determination. "We're going to overload the reactor," he said, his tone unwavering. "It's our only shot. If we can concentrate the energy and release it in a burst, it might disrupt the creature, give us a chance to escape." The crew exchanged tense glances, but Carla nodded, understanding his plan. "It's risky, but if it's our only option..." "Prepare for a manual jump as soon as we fire the burst," Jackson said, his voice steadier than he felt. Rios worked swiftly, rerouting every available ounce of power into the reactor. As the core began to overload, the ship shuddered, the lights flickering wildly. The whispers intensified, the entity pressing harder, as if sensing the danger. "Almost there," Rios grunted, sweat beading on his brow. "Stand by." With a final agonizing surge, the reactor released its stored energy in a blinding pulse that rippled outward, tearing through the dark corridors and slamming into the shadowy entity. A guttural scream echoed through the ship, raw and primal as the creature recoiled, its form disintegrating under the force of the blast. "Now?" Jackson shouted. Rios engaged the jump, and the Vanguard leapt forward, tearing away from the entity's reach. They shot into the cold safety of space, leaving the dark structure, and its prisoner, behind. Silence fell over the ship, the whispers finally gone. The crew let out a collective breath, shaken but alive. Jackson looked around at his team, their faces pale yet resolute. They had stared into the abyss and survived, their own fierce resilience holding the darkness at bay. Jackson exhaled, relief mingling with a newfound respect for the strength that ran through his crew, and through humanity itself.